Welcome to Learning cEDH, the podcast dedicated to teaching you everything you need to know about competitive Commander. I'm your host Matthew, and I'm once again joined by my co-host Eric. And today we're here to talk to you about some cEDH tournament prep stuff. We're going to be going over some of the decks that we've been testing, talking about events that we're going to be playing in, and going over some general strategy of things we like to do when we're prepping for an event or just trying to get better in a big burst, I guess you'd say.
Yeah, so this is going to be just really fun kind of podcast where we're just going to be like playing loose and fast. Hopefully there is some points you can follow along, and it's just not us talking into the ether or just, hearing ourselves speak, but it's just we're coming up really close on some events that we're participating in. And I know there's like events basically every weekend, and there's the cookout coming up, there's Surfside coming up, there's Lotus Con, but there's events every weekend. Obviously Mox Masters, Chaos Series, the two different versions of that, and a plethora of other stuff. You can go to like the Eminence website and basically find all those types of cEDH events, and it's a great resource to, look for your next game. So
yeah, lots of good stuff to look forward to. If you enjoy this podcast, want to learn more about cEDH, check the links in the description. Start from the very beginning to learn all the basics of cEDH, the archetypes, etc. Go watch the Learn to Play series. But if you're here to learn about how to prep for your next event or hear about what we're wanting to play, stick around. This video is brought to you by Inked Gaming. Inked has amazing artwork to choose from for playmats, mouse pads, bags, and other accessories, while also allowing you to upload your own custom artwork to show off your style. Check out the affiliate link in the description below to level up your look and support the channel. This video is brought to you by Card Trader. Card Trader Zero is a service that lets you buy cards from all over the world with no extra shipping fees. Cards are sent to Card Trader to verify, and they'll keep them until you're ready to get them all at once with a single shipping fee. Register at the link in the description below to get $2 just for signing up.
So Matt, you've been playing some different decks lately. Consistently, you talked about playing with Rogsai. Are you sticking with Rogsai? What's it looking like? Have you been dipping your toes into other decks right now?
Yeah, I am in literally every game and everything I do. I have a hard time sticking to one thing. I really suck at it. So yeah, I played Rogsai pretty consistently. And then I took a break, not because I was tired of the deck, just I wasn't really playing a lot. And when I was just kind of like, I should probably stop farming all these streams that I go on because I'm on a bit of a hot streak. On a bit of a hot streak. It's like, let me cool it off, play some Kinnan, play some whatever. But yeah, so I played a lot of Rogsai and started approaching the list differently than when I first started. Because when I first started picking up the deck, I sucked with it. I was doing really poor. I was just like trying to play it like Korvold, I guess. I was just like, try to jam really fast and try to win, blah, blah, blah. Don't take advantage of the fact that I'm playing blue. But if you have blue, you should take advantage of it because a lot of times like turn 1 Ristic or Mystic or especially sandbagging Nas is way more reasonable when you're in a blue deck. Just any kind of heavily interactive deck because passing with mana open is just a good play pattern to have. I played a lot of mid-rangey stuff like Blue Farm and Dawnwaker and trying to apply a bit of that and then a bit of like the manual storming because I found that it's very rare with a deck like Rogsai. I just get to go Thoracle Consult with, one piece of backup. It's really often it's like, okay, I got to breach 4 cards in the yard and a tutor. Let's try to make this happen. And so that's been a lot of fun prepping with that. And then, yeah, recently there's been a lot of innovations with like Mardu and Timna Jessica specifically, and I've been trying that, which has again been a bit of a radical departure because sometimes it is the like jam fast turn 2 deck with like silence protection or Grand Abolisher, Ranger Captain as backup to help you get through it, defense grid. But then sometimes it is also just like all right, we have a bunch of cheap attackers, let's do the Timna thing and get that going. And it's been a lot of fun getting to do that, and especially since it's not a Nas deck, you get to be a little bit more loose with your life total because like Bolus of Citadel, you don't really have to have like 40 life to win with Citadel. You need like 20 maybe.
So that was the next question. Which variation of Timna Jessica have you been playing?
Yeah, so I've been on what's been dubbed, I guess, the Chernobyl list, using Bolus of Citadel, there's no Adnos, and then using World Gorger Dragon, which I kind of hate, but has only won so far. I haven't got bodied with it yet. I haven't got all my permanents exiled yet. Hoarding Broodlord, and it is a ton of fun. I really love it. I love getting to do like Magda better than Magda does, which is what I feel like, because I've just been like, I had a game where I got to play like Magda the turn before the other Magda player, and then I got to just like turn 3, just sack it, go get the Broodlord, do the Saw in Half nonsense. So it's a super fun deck. You get to run big, crazy things like Citadel, Broodlord, and World Gorger Dragon are just 3 awesome cards, especially with the new World Gorger art, which looks super awesome. So you get to run a lot of fun stuff, and then you really cut down on all the interaction. You don't even run the red blast. You're just like silence effects, a little tiny bit of removal, and then just try to jam. Don't be the scrub who's wasting all their mana and cards interacting with the table. Let somebody else do that, and just take advantage of, get into Goblin Engineer or a Goblin Welder in a defense grid, and then just go off. So it's been a lot of fun. I really like the variant. It's a bit different because I've been a really sneaky, sandbaggy type of turbo player recently, and you can't really do that with the deck too much. There's a bit you can do with, especially with the graveyard reanimation stuff with Villas, where you're just like faithless looting stuff away, and then a couple turns later you get somebody with a reanimate, and I've been enjoying kind of prepping with that. I don't know going into the cookout if I'm going to go with it or Roxai or just last minute switch to Blue Farm, which I don't expect to do because I'm a little bored with that list.
So for all of our viewers and listeners, speaking of the Mardu deck specifically, there are basically like 3 variations of the Chernobyl style deck list. So it harkens back to Shiver. If you know anything about Shiver, they have a beautiful primer that talks about how the deck plays and it breaks it down. It's more like a novel. I thought Brian Cook's Roxai primer was insane. Shivers is pretty up there too. So Shivers specifically does run ad nauseum. The version that Matt's been messing with is very similar to Gary the Wizard's, the one that won Mox Masters not too long ago. So it is on Peer into the Abyss. So it takes advantage of like the meaty like demon and dragons, and obviously it has Wargorger Dragon in it. So it allows you to still play Bowls of Citadel, but then you can still cast Appear into the Abyss. It doesn't matter what your life's at. So that's that variation. There are all 23 lands. And then there's like Jesse from Spite Plays. Their list isn't on. They're running Abdel. I think, is that how you say that?
Yeah, Abdel Adrian, I think.
So yeah, they're all falling under this umbrella, and there's, their cards different, but it's a very similar philosophy and theory. And this Chernobyl thing, which Chernobyl is basically like a representation of Bolas the Citadel. This deck does something really unique. So everyone's been trying to interact here. Like, so if this is the stack, the battlefield and the graveyard, majority of the decks attack here. They try to always attack the stack. This deck plays to the battlefield and it plays from the graveyard. So it bypasses a lot of the interaction. And it doesn't mean you can't interact with the deck, but it does a lot of that. It, uses specifically like the welders, the reanimation packages, and it uses the welders to put something like a defense grid into play, or obviously Grand Abolish your Ranger Captain and puts like something like a Demon or Villas or Hoarding Broodlord or any of that. Some are still possibly playing Razaketh, even the Kalia deck that also won a Mox Masters not too long ago. Mardu has just been on a hot streak lately, by the way. It plays a lot of that Chernobyl style stuff. And again, it cheats these large threats into play. So it's a really cool strategy with, honestly, different commanders. And we've seen even more innovation in the Mardu sphere lately with like Dahada that's really kind of like come on the scene and basically is like, Mardu Rogue Rack, if you really think about it. It's effectively a free commander that generates breach fodder and treasures. And it's pretty wild, like how a lot of these decks are coming along. And I think as the format, I think is still I think it's pretty open. You still are starting to see a lot of decks pop up. You see a lot of the same suspects, but like Tyam got hot recently, and obviously Tyam's up there. But Tyam plays in while being a different deck, it's bypassing, the force of wills of the format. And I think that's a really great spot to be. If your deck can effectively do that and also have a coherent strategy behind that, I think you can have a good recipe for success with those styles.
Yeah, we've definitely just also like the new white and black cards have just really contributed to this. Like it's allowing you, because I think those are the colors, especially when we get to talk about like stuff from Lord of the Rings, that have just been getting good things to the board, because like this is only one color different from Roxai, going from Grixis to Mardu, but that's a deck that completely plays like to the hand. Like it's doing the stack thing. Like if you don't have a Rhystic or Mystic in play, you don't really have anything in play. It's just mana. You aren't really playing in a way that's as obvious what your advantage is, especially over Spell Table where people might not even know what's your hand count right now. Just one annoyance of playing with that, because people can just be winning and you not realize it. So yeah, it's been really interesting getting to play more to the board. And also you have a commander in Timna and Jessica that are really good at both different sides of it. If you're falling behind and this is a game where people are having pieces in play that you need to deal with, you have Jessica. If you get interacted with, you get disrupted, your hand count's starting to get really low, just don't have any gas, you are developing early on a lot of creatures for very cheap. You even run cards like Memnite in this list to just get a dude that is a artifact also into play very cheaply. And then obviously cards like Esper Sentinel. One thing I've done with testing this list that I don't usually recommend is immediately making swaps, but that's because Lord of the Rings has just made Mardu crazy, and I really wanted to test specifically Mount Doom, which combos with Worldgorger Dragon, Lotho, which is a Orzhov staple, I believe will be in most decks from now on, and then Orcish Bowmaster, which people are calling the new Dockside.
Yeah, so Lotho is like, as I call it, a treasure shredder, because it triggers off, you being the owner of the card. If you play your second spell, it triggers itself. So it's not Crom. Everyone kept calling it Crom. Like, no, it's Ledger Shredder. Like,
Ledger Shredder, but good.
Yeah, it's Treasure Shredder. So yeah, that card's pretty ridiculous. I think that card is actually the sleeper card of the set.
Yeah.
Obviously, Orcish Bowmaster is generating a lot of like heat on it, because everybody kept kind of compare it to like, what is it, Monologue Tax or whatever, and it's
which is 3 mana.
Yeah, a 3 mana
not
enchantment
a creature.
Yeah, and not a legendary creature. So a creature that can attack with Tymna, provide resources for Mox Amber, triggers itself. It is night and day different. And, not for nothing, if you happen to have a Villas out, you get to just get extra gravy on the biscuit for that one, because, you're going to get to draw cards as well. I just think that card overall is really powerful for its mana cost. And I think it's going to be the card that when you see it, it again will change the way you play, because it's going to, I could even potentially see it in something like Tivit, and I could be, completely wrong on this, but you play that on like 2, you can untap and cast your Tivit, basically, almost every time. And that's just really disgusting. And the fact that now it makes it hard to play into those type of cards. And we've discussed this before on stream, where like they keep printing these cards whenever a player does X, and they somehow keep giving it to white and blue, and I don't understand why. It's really frustrating. Now, granted, we just got Orcish Bowmaster, and if you've been living under the rock, even then, you probably know what a card's, because the Bowmasters probably hit you for 1 at least, under the rock. But I don't know how that card, again, is that card going to be like a ubiquitous staple? I'm not sure. We'll see, because I'm going to be testing it in a deck that we'll talk about a little bit later. But even then, it's like, it seems really good, but at the same time, I don't know if it fits. And it's just one of those things that's just kind of like, where I think it's really exciting for Tymna. Obviously, it's good against Tymna decks, but it's also good for Tymna decks, because it does twofold, and like specifically Matt's list. And I'm really excited because that deck got a huge, to me, upgrade, even though like it hurts the Tymna decks. The Tymna decks can be a little bit more disciplined. They just don't necessarily have to attack into the player with mana untapped, so they can Bowmaster shoot for 1 and make a 1/1 and block and kill your Tymna. But the fact that it also gives you a body, and it gives you fodder to sacrifice for your Diabolic Intent, your Calling the Weaks, those type of cards, and it is a Cloudstone Curio like win condition.
Yep.
So it checks a lot of boxes for that deck specifically.
The cool thing about it is a lot of times you in the early game. Well, which one thing I want to say before we move on from talking about Lotho was that somebody had commented, because you specifically said we needed a 2-drop that when people cast things make treasures, and someone was like, well, you guys predicted that, just like we predicted the Star City thing. But so yeah, that happened. And I was also going to say one of the weaknesses of Lotho is it's a 2/1, so it's very good at attacking. People don't want to trade with their Malcolms, their Tymnas, their Nandilas, but it dies to Bowmaster ETB, which is maybe a negative going forward. But Bowmaster is also really cool because it lets you, it supports the Tymna plan. It gets rid of blockers. It creates 2 attackers. If the board is empty, you can just, with Tymna and Bowmasters, you always will have an Orc, and then plus the Bowmasters itself. And it also is cool because a lot of times in the early game, you have to kind of choose, because if you only have like 3-4 mana, you kind of have to pick between Tymna or Jessica. And then Bowmasters is a Jessica effect with the pings, which are super helpful, but it plays into Tymna. So I think it really lines up well. And like you said, it gets to go infinite with, you get to do Cloudstone Curio with it. Your World Gorger, it keeps coming back in. It's going to ping. It's doing everything the deck wants to do, and it's doing it very efficiently and with 2 bodies for Tymna. So I think the deck has just been a home run. I've only played it once, but it won me the game immediately. I got to wheel with a Villas in play, clear the board, hit myself 12 times, draw 12 cards, made a 22-22, got to smack somebody with it. It has absolutely been cracked so far. So I'm really looking forward to getting to test more with it and more with this list.
Yeah. And then the deck also picked up, like you said, it picked up Mountain Doom. And Mountain Doom is basically like a free roll land in this. I know it pings you for a damage, but at the same time. It just gives you the ability to have a dual land in your deck that comes into play untapped. That again is a War Gorger Dragon like outlet. And on top of that, if you ever get into that late game sticky situation, you run enough legendary artifacts to where you can clear the board with its, third ability, which is wild. And again, I think that doesn't even need that text on it. It's Mountain Doom. It makes sense. Flavor of the set for Lord of the Rings. But if it just had the first two abilities, it's 100% playable.
Yep.
So it doesn't even need that last effect, but it just happens to be there. So it's really, really nice. And the artwork is pretty amazing on it. So this deck just gets that's pretty disgusting. Like that's some wild upgrades.
Yeah.
To see for an archetype that has recently been doing well in some, Mox Masters. There was, I think it was the Chaos series where like Tim Najeska did really well again. It was like top forward or whatever. So then that's just really good. And the pilots of this are going to get really rewarded for playing a deck that they've been on for a long time. The dedicated Tim Najeska pilots on this specific list. And I just want to say, this isn't Mad Farm.
Yes. Yeah, it's not Mad Farm.
Mad Farm and Chernobyl, while they have similar cards and they cross over, they're not the same deck. And the principles and theories and the way the deck plays is completely different. I get it, they both have the Tim Najeska plan, but this is not a Grim Hireling Professional Facebreaker deck.
Yeah.
It's not running Cathar Commander or whatever that card's called. It attacks the game in a completely different way. And while they both played to the battlefield, this one really plays from the graveyard. If you've never played against Villas, that's a wild card to get reanimated on turn 2. And they put a giant demon into play that wipes the board, that can wipe the board and also draw 8 cards. That card puts a lot of pressure on the battlefield. So if it's a game that's also, it's just basically reanimate, draw 8, which is wild. And still utilize cards like Bolus Citadel and resources, and the fact that it can dockside through various hate pieces. If a Dauthi Voidwalker's in play, it doesn't care. It'll just Cloudstone Curio loop to a Dauthi and then just cast Jessica. So it is a great example of a deck utilizing pieces of cards that typically people wouldn't consider, like an Insolent Neonate or a Voldaren Epicure, and maximize those type of cards. And if you really look at the deck list, it plays cards like Tithe, Portable Hole, which I think Portable Hole is actually a pretty good Magic card.
Yeah.
And we can't forget, actually, a big part of that is our favorite commander on the database, Oswald Fiddlebender.
Oswald finally won. Oswald did win me a game when I was in a very tricky spot where I was trying to combo through Soul Guide Lantern in play, and I just kept having to put the player in positions to do it. And then I was just slammed a Grand Abolisher. It's I really hope that he forgot about this. That it doesn't work through that. And then he's just okay, well, in response, I'll activate the Soul Guide. Exile my Dockside. My Cloudstone Curio was already exiled. Got to do all my win cons. And then I had to Fiddlebender to get my Wishclaw Talisman, to do Scheming Symmetry, Op Agent stuff, and then eventually be able to Hullbreaker Horror. I've made fun of Oswald Fiddlebender a lot, but he is finally having a purpose here. And it is just generally cool that this deck gets to take advantage of good legendary commanders already, like Oswald Fiddlebender. I don't know if Lotho is going to make it as a good cEDH commander, but honestly, in lower powered things, it's probably going to be crazy. And then Magda.
I will say it would be interesting to see it and then Luris is your companion.
You can do cool stuff. I think especially Orzhov gets a tight combo anytime soon. Lotho will just be a Dockside in the command zone, kind of. That I could see going crazy, because I really think that's all is holding back Orzhov, especially as it is now. People are mostly playing permanents that's get value or stacks you out, or silence effects to go for the win, because you kind of just have to ignore people's hands. You have to have an effect that lets you just say, I don't care about how much you've drawn through Rhystic this turn or this game. I'm gonna just keep jamming silence effects, and then a 2 or 3 mana win con, just resolving silence countered. Oh, Orm's Chant, Animate dead. Okay, GG. Let's move on. It's been a lot of fun. It's been really awesome.
Big fan of this. I'll actually get to play against, whether it's Tejada and then Tim Najeska. And if you want to know more about Tejada, we're not the experts on it. I know Zane's already done several videos on Tejada, whether it's on Eminence. I think he was on Mons' channel as well. So you can check those out and see where they kind of break the deck down into depth and, help you kind of understand. And I've seen the deck. I've goldfished that deck probably, I don't know. I don't want to be over exaggerated, but probably 30 times. And it's a pretty wild deck. I like it a lot because it utilizes a lot of cards that other decks don't utilize. Like it's a really good Yawgmoth's Will deck, and I think Yawgmoth's Will is a really powerful card. Like if Underworld Breach wasn't legal, we'd be playing Yawgmoth's Will more regularly. So I think having a second copy of that card is really powerful because it's also just a great setup card as well. Because you can just play other stuff out of your graveyard, and if you somehow need your graveyard to loop, or you're trying to do like a Breach loop, you can just then cast like a Warrior's Oath Final Fortune effect and go from there. And then the Miscast, they just came out basically with an episode talking about Mardu and kind of the summer of Mardu, which I think a lot of those principles are pretty strong because we just seen in the last Mox Masters a deck that utilized a lot of those principles do really well. The new version of like the Anomalist that group has been like working on, and the power level of what that deck, because that makes you look at it all and go, wow, that's a scary, because that to me, it's super scary. You never have to cast your commander at all. So again, it just goes, oh, Drannith Magistrate, okay.
Yeah.
Don't care about Drannith. I'm just going to do my thing. Yeah, it's really cool seeing a lot of this, like, you know, revolutionary stuff. And a lot of these principles and stuff for these decks were around for a while. And I just don't think it was widely accepted because I don't want to say gatekeepy, but there was like just this common theory. If you don't play 28 lands in your deck, you're doing it wrong. And you got to play like all these like Thrasios style decks or whatever. And I still think those decks have a place. I just think they just need to adapt and just to continuously stay relevant and just, you know, update their technology as well. And it doesn't mean they can't come back to the things that they were doing if the format shifts. We're at this point where everyone's trying to mid-range, that the turbo decks have enough tools now to where they're just going to punch through. And they may not always win, but they're always going to be scary when they sit down at the table, especially with like the way that they're being designed now. They're being designed with carefulness and elegance. And I think that is a scary balance for any deck, because while you can sit there with your Mystic and your Ristic, it doesn't matter if Grand Abolisher hits the battlefield.
Yep.
You better hopefully you have exactly Otawara or Touch the Spirit Realm. So
Okay, so part of my tournament prep has been prepping my play group, which you've been doing the same. Kind of get your boys ready for the event. And I have one friend who's going to cook out with me, and then some others who are they're kind of prepping for their own locals that they're going to be doing a lot more of, which is really cool. Especially because I got them into cEDH. Like one of them only started playing Magic like last year, and then we got him into Commander and got him into cEDH. It's been really cool to see sort of develop quickly. It's been awesome. And then yeah, I have a friend who's kind of struggled to get into cEDH. And he kind of likes more thematic, flavorful stuff. And he was basically from day one. Like he picked a green deck, played it, looked up green, saw Nissa, and was a Nissa fanboy. And so he got a deck finally that is, you know, you can play Nissa in an actual cEDH shell. And I actually think the deck is crazy.
For, you know, people who don't know what this is or don't play Modern, what does this new Nissa do?
Yeah, so the new commander is Nissa Resurgent Animist. It's 2 and a green, which is actually very nice compared to like Selvala, which is 1 green, which made it really awkward to try to turn one your really green commander. That's already having the like Najila thing of being able to go like Crypt Land or Jeweled Lotus or whatever. It's already just makes it easier. And Nissa does crazy things off of landfall. Her only ability is landfall. When a land enters, she has the Lotus Cobra effect. She makes 1 mana of any color. And if this is the second time that ability triggers in a turn, she has you reveal the top card of your library until you reveal either an elf or an elemental. What this allows you to do, and to me, it's also very apparent they built this Nissa with this combo in mind, because this gets you both Quirion Ranger and Ashaya, which when looped together with Nissa will net you 1 mana each time you perform the loop, because Ashaya turns all your creatures into forest. Quirion Ranger gets to return itself as a forest. And then when Nissa sees that Quirion Ranger come into play, it makes a mana. You untap your Nissa, get to tap it for a mana, so you get to net infinite mana. And the third card, so in this list, you only run 3 cards that can trigger off of Nissa. You run Quirion Ranger, you run Ashaya, and then you run Fierce Empath, which is your tutor to go get typically Woodland Bellower, which allows you to search up a couple different ways to use your infinite mana. Typically, you're going to grab your Tireless Tracker, which turns that infinite landfall that you get into infinite clues. You have infinite mana. You get to draw your whole deck, cast your Dosin, your Veil of Summers, whatever you want, play all your creatures, and then Finale of Devastation, go for the win. this kind of seems like a typical green list in that it does Ashaya Quirion Ranger combos. It looks to make a bunch of mana with its commander, but it is better. It's I think one of the best, not even just one of the best mono green commanders, might just be one of the best green commanders, because Nissa turns all of your land drops into, it's a Lotus Cobra effect. So when you play a fetch land, you get a green. You crack that fetch land, you get a green, and you tutor, and you get to tap that land. So a really popular and annoying play pattern that my friend has been doing is get to Jeweled Lotus, crack, cast Nissa, play a fetch land. You get access to 3 more mana, and you just tutored one of your win cons into your hand without casting a spell. You just got to do that off your land drop.
So does it tutor and make the mana, or does it?
Yeah, so Nissa will trigger making the mana every single time.
So its secondary effect, it just adds that on there as well.
So basically Nissa has the landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, add 1 mana of any color. That always happens. And then it checks. Then, if that's the second time, do this. And that's where you reveal cards off the top. It shouldn't. It's not fair. And so what you end up having is one of the most explosive decks in the format in terms of mana. You do run some iffy lands, but even your tapped fetch lands that fetch tapped, they still make you 2 mana. They're still better Ancient Tombs, and they still get to tutor you a card. So you really don't care if your land enters tapped or not, because they all make you 2 mana. The only lands you don't really want to cast are Forest, or don't want to play are Forest. And so a lot of times what you have is just a deck that gets to explosively produce mana, doesn't care about any stacks effect, barring Elish Norn, Mother of Machines. In terms of mana production, it's, I think, one of the best collector oof decks because it's still incredibly explosive. You literally don't care at all about that mana crit once you cast Nissa, because you're going to be having 6, 7, 8 mana just off of land triggers for the rest of the game. You get to run cards like Scape Shift that get to tutor up your lands. You can do really funny things like Scape Shift and it being mana positive, and then getting like a Dryad Arbor, and then natural ordering that away to grab the Ashaya. Now all your things are lands. Guess what? All your lands triggered it. All your creatures now trigger Nissa because they're lands. It becomes so absurd very quickly. And again, everything that it does setting up the combo is casting creature spells or playing lands, one of which is very hard to interact with playing lands. And then casting creature spells again, most of the main interaction that we see in the format is counter target non-creature spell, counter target instant or sorcery. There are cards like Mindbreak Trap and Force of Will that hit creatures, but those often aren't the cards that people are, like super hard mulliganing for, because typically Flusterstorm gets the job done. Fierce Guardianship gets the job done. Against this deck, which in my experience puts up win attempts turn 2, turn 3 every single game, you have to have that Swords to Plowshares in your hand. You have to have Mental Misstep, hope they don't have a Cavern of Souls naming Elf on that Quirion Ranger. You have to have something to answer somewhere along this line. And then also, but green is just really good at getting stuff back. You get to run Regrowth, Eternal Witness. So you really just keep you on your toes constantly. But yeah, this is a deck that it doesn't have any EDH top 16 results yet. It hasn't been entered in the events. I expect this thing to be top 16ing with more regularity than maybe any other monocolored commander.
So what's really interesting about this deck is that when we were talking about how like the Timna Jessica deck attacks the format, this attacks it in a similar way. It is attacking, it's just ignoring the stack effectively. Like, yeah, you're going to cast a few spells here and there. What deck doesn't, but at the same time, what it's trying to do is play to the strength of it. And I think one of the biggest misconceptions about cEDH, and this is just my opinion, is that card advantage in the command zone really matters. And I think mana is more valuable in the command zone. That's just my opinion. I think card advantage is great as long as your deck can produce a ton of mana. If it has access to stuff like Dockside Extortionist or Treasures or stuff like that, you look at these commanders that are really powerful. So if you look at something like Tivit has both. Yeah. Tivit provides mana and it provides you cards. That's why Tivit's a really powerful commander. It's also a win condition in itself. It's big, it's hard to interact with, and that's what plays into the strength of that deck. Nissa is really interesting because Nissa is also a 3/3 for 3, which is really nice because it just basically poops on Timna for attacking it. Yeah. I think it's the deck that when you don't respect it, it will blow you out of the water. And that's kind of what's really interesting about the deck list. And then once I think people maybe understand how it wins, and once they see that, they're going to mulligan according to it. Because if you really think about it, like decks like Ashaya, you would think were pretty hard to interact with, but Ashaya doesn't have card advantage and mana in the command zone. And that's what this deck has both. And the fact that, because it reveals, right, when it triggers off the land landfall, so it gets around opposition agent. Now, granted, you gonna ultimately need to search your deck.
Drannith is also going to be an issue for this deck. The deck is so focused on early Tymnas that I think you're mostly avoiding that. It's kind of like saying Drannith is an issue for Najeela. The Najeela is so easily gets out before a Drannith, often, obviously not always. And then the deck is able to run stacks effects for so easily, making it just a little bit harder for people to get, you know, that 3 mana for opposition agent when you collect or oof them turn 1. Especially, again, being able to do turn 1 Nissa, crack a fetch land, make the mana for Collector Oof, play the Collector Oof. I don't care about artifacts the rest of the game.
Real quick, so explain that to people, because we talked about Tireless Tracker being one of the outlets of the deck.
Yeah.
And let's have your Collector Oof out. Well, how do you win if that's not the case? How do you perform your infinite outlet combo if you can't tutor up the Tireless Tracker with Woodland Bellower?
Yeah, which is easy to deal with if it's your oof, because you just bounce it with Quirion Ranger. If it's an opposing oof, so Duskwatch Recruiter will let you get all of your creatures. At that point, you don't need to draw your cards, because all you need is all your creatures. Then you can also start to get your Koglas. You can start fighting creatures. Once you get all your creatures and do all these effects, you start to be able to do loops with Eternal Witness. There are things you can do, kind of like a lot of green decks, as a niche line where you can start looping Beast Within and then having Kogla fight all the beasts, destroy everybody's permanents. You have a lot of different outlets, and then again, Fearsome Path gets Woodland Bellower, which gets this or Tireless Tracker. So you get the option to go for either if either line is unavailable to you. Some of the lists are on Nylea, which is also an outlet that lets you start to mill your entire library and getting creatures out. Again, you don't care if it goes to the graveyard, because if Finale goes to the graveyard, you just Eternal Witness it back or Regrowth it back. Get to do the whole thing. Again, there are board states where some of these win cons aren't going to work. If there's literally an Oof on somebody's board, a Drannith over here, Doffy Voidwalker over here, you start to have to, you know, look around a bit more and try to pick off things. But you run a lot of fight spells in this list for that reason, because you're putting out big things. Even on Nissa, you get to kill a lot of things with a fight spell, but Ashaya kills just about anything, because you're going to have 2 to 3 lands in play plus your 3 creatures. Ashaya's pretty big at that point, and then you just kind of get to surgically remove things. Again, it's a deck that if things get slowed down, you have bigger creatures than everybody else. So you can just play a game where you're doing Kogla beatdown. You also have Kodama as a potential outlet with Tireless Tracker and Guildless Commons, which is a little bit of a strange loop, but basically you bounce the Guildless Commons, you'll stack your triggers to where the clue will come after that. The clue will trigger Kodama. You put the Guildless Commons back into play, rinse and repeat, you get infinite mana. So the deck has a lot of different ways. Even if Ashaya gets exiled, you have more ways to win. And again, also, if the game goes on so long that you don't have a way to win anymore, you have the biggest dudes that get to beat down people.
Well, obviously it's very different than Tayam. I think it plays kind of the same. If you let it do its thing, it's going to win.
Yeah.
And I'm excited. I'd like to try this deck out. I'm going to goldfish it some more, because I've been having a blast like goldfishing it. I feel like that's one of the, and we talked about this off camera, it's one of those like decks I like, oh, what's your commander? Oh, it's Nissa. And they're like, oh yeah, that's cool.
Oh, mono green. Yeah, whatever.
Show up to any pod and just like, you know, be a pub stomper. I'm just joking. Don't do that. But what's interesting about the deck is it takes advantage because it is limited. You're not allowed to play elves and elementals in your deck outside of your few pieces. So it does miss out on what makes green really like even cEDH playable. I think it's just having all those dorks, and it happens to have actually enough mana dorks that aren't elves, which is really interesting. And it got a big upgrade in this set in Delighted Halfling, which makes your Nissa uncounterable when you cast it. So it takes away like kind of some of that effect.
And the Ashaya and the Dosin, which I think are also very key.
Very key on that. And Kogla, like if you know, cast your Kogla. So, and your Kodama. So yeah, it's a great card for the deck. It's interesting. I haven't looked at the deck list recently. I haven't seen if it's been updated. Is this deck on City of Solitude?
No, I don't think so. Let me check. We have ours now. We've kind of split it up from the guy we got it from, because the list we started with was from our Seifert 981. It's one of the more, I think it's got the most views of any of the Nissa decks. We've kind of moved in a different direction where they were running Vorinclex, which has a very convoluted line with Cankerbloom. It's actually reached out to the author about Vorinclex, because I was so perplexed by Vorinclex, and I was like, it's got to be Cankerbloom. And yeah, it ended up, it's kind of a convoluted line with looping that and putting counters on your Saga. But no, I don't think they're on City of Solitude.
I just think that card is one of those cards that in a deck like this, when it's trying to win, when it's comboing its turn, it's not trying to get that turn back to anybody, really. I think City of Solitude is a card that people need to take a look at if your deck can support it. Obviously, if you're in Sands White, you don't have access to, all these other cards. And I could see something like a Defense Grid or something like that in this list. But where I like City of Solitude is that it prevents Auto War and Beseiju.
Yeah.
Because they can't activate it. It also starts to touch the Spirit Realm as well because it's an ability.
It is really funny that this is a creature combo that cannot lose to Otawara because all of your creatures are lands during it, but it loses to Beseiju because you can Beseiju Ashaya, which is hilarious.
I will say that's pretty funny, but I just think City of Solitude is one of those cards that is really interesting, and I don't think people realize that it also shuts off Mana Dorks and Treasures. So it's one of those things too, like if you cast your City of Solitude and they're sitting on a bunch of Dockside Treasures or from anything, they kind of got to use them, because if not, and they don't crack them, they're just sitting there. So obviously not necessarily like related to this deck, but if you were able to play City Solitude and they're just like, I'll eat my treasures.
Yeah.
And you just your Dockside, that you just blow them out with that, because it's really interesting. A lot of people don't realize that it stops, mana production on activated abilities of like Dorks and Treasures. So City of Solitude is a just really interesting card, and it helps you double down on that Docent effect. Then I get Docent like way easier to tutor for and stuff in this list. I just think having another type of effect is really nice.
Yeah, and it lines up well with Destiny Spinner as well, making that uncounterable.
I just think that's a card that should be worth considering in some of these lists. Just as we've seen silence effects of any variety, no matter if they're a worse Grand Abolisher or a worse Ranger Captain, they're still good. They're still playable, especially too in a deck that's proactive, that's trying to win. One of the biggest questions I get is like, how's Docent been playing for you? And I'm like, it's been in my list for over a year. And I'm like, it hasn't ever come out. And I'm like, what do you think? Like the card, any type of deck that's trying to like win and combo, cast ad nauseum or whatever that looks like, that card turns out to be pretty good. So but yeah, that's really exciting. I'm pretty pumped. I like having a deck that's not a Turbo Nas built. I've messed with Kodama decks for so long. I love that commander. I've played all these different variations of Kodama, and people, they're just like, oh, that's kind of cool or whatever. And I go out to my locals and I've just like beat people up with it because it's such a fun deck. And I really like the landfall ability. I've always loved playing like blue-green Kodama because it's pure and it allows you to like abuse things like Thrasios, and it's just another Thrasios outlet deck. And that was my partner, was just Kodama Thrasios, and you just get to really abuse that, and it was fun. So this one being like a very interesting contender that, I think with the right pilots behind it can get behind this deck, put some time and effort. And like you said, I think it only gets better, especially as we like expand into these different universes beyond and all this type of stuff. So we'll see like Mana Dorks that aren't necessarily elves. We'll see them from different creature types, maybe like humans and that type of stuff. It'll probably get a piece like every 2 to 3 sets. So that are just maybe strict upgrades. So
I think, and just as green hopefully gets new good cEDH cards, it'll help, because I think there is like a lot of room in here. There are cards that are like kind of synergistic for the list. It's not necessarily a must run card in the list. I think there's like 5 to 10, maybe more slots that could be filled with just strong staples or other landfall things. And the deck does get to run like niche, like Krosan Wayfarer is a card you don't typically see in cEDH, but it's actually really strong here. We were kind of like messing around trying to figure out how you turn 1 win, and I think that card is actually required to turn 1 win with this deck. Yeah, it's definitely one I think has a lot of room to improve. We're kind of working on it, trying to do some things. Probably will try City of Solitude. I think that could slot in somewhere here. Maybe Defense Grid as well. Yeah, it's definitely one I'm looking forward to doing some more play testing with, and probably losing to even more.
Is this deck on Survival of the Fittest?
I think no, actually.
But it is on Cradle, right?
Yeah, it's on Cradle. Which Cradle has been, like I was saying, Cradle is like fairly good. It does have to have like more than 3 creatures to be better than a fetch land the turn you play it, but it's still like often pretty good land.
Yeah, and there's some weird Cradle loops you can do in the deck too, especially if you have your Yabamaya out and your Kodama, and then it just, you get to a point in the game, if the game bogs down, you'll eventually just find a way to just kind of like landfall your way to victory. I will say, so this is what's interesting, because general consensus, green's been a little bit lower in people's like opinions lately, and I think this deck does a great job maximizing what green's really good at, because green has a lot of tools. I just think that there's not a turbo green deck that's like, when you look at turbo mono green in general, it just doesn't line with the way the format's being played. So I think this deck does a really good job actually producing a turbo green deck that maximizes its creature base. So it's not doesn't have to have dark rituals, because its dark rituals are in its lands, which are uncountable. So
a strength of typically green decks is they do creature combos, which are hard to interact with. But most of the time, you're having to do some kind of non-creature thing to get there. You're having to Worldly Tutor, you have to Finale, you have to Greenspin Zenith. And then when you get to avoid that, you miss the ways to slow down like a Savala or even like some of the 2-color green decks is just like counter your creature tutors, counter your Eldritch Evolution, stuff like that. You don't usually have to cast those spells in this deck. So a lot of the times it's just make mana tutor for 2 turns. Do you have a counter that hits a creature? Oh, you don't? Well, you lose. Getting to avoid the setup of the green decks of just like having to cast a creature tutor here, even like something like Eladamri's Call is very powerful, but is very counterable compared to a landfall trigger.
That's really exciting. This deck sounds fun. I'll probably sleeve it up and just to see what it's like.
It is also the #1 deck if you see them Fet. This is the best deck to Op Agent in response to a Fet crack. Absolutely do it. You prevent so much. It's so impactful.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point to play that, to understand like how to play around it. And again, it's one of those decks that I think like people are going to have to adapt to it if they don't know does or they don't respect it because like, oh, it's mono green, whatever, and then it just gets they just get bodied by it and you're just like, all right, well, I'm comboing off because they're going to run cards like whether it's like Savala Brostorm or Morrowind where they're having to run like pump spells in Morrowind or Phyrexian Dreadnoughts in the other deck. It plays just functional cards regardless. There's the difference.
So yeah, that's kind of been what I've been playing with and playing against. It's been pretty good so far. I've been liking the Timna Jessica. I'm probably going to do some sessions where I like swap between that and Rogsai back to back and just see how it feels in like similar pods and similar situations. I feel like in the pods I've been playing in specifically with very proactive decks, I'm probably going to like Timna Jessica because just keep jamming, ignore the stupid blue spells because I can't counter Magda activations or any stupid thing Nissa does anyways. But yeah, so let's hear about what you've been playing and playing against in your tournament prep.
Yeah, I've been playing Mono White Heliod for everyone knows.
Let's go. Finally. He admits it.
I've been working tirelessly on my favorite deck. I've been working on Korvold. Everybody, anybody knows me knows that that's what I want to play and what I've been working on. Before I get into Korvold, though, I've done work with all the probably top 10 decks in the format because I think not only being a good pilot of whatever you're playing, but being, well versed in understanding what you're playing against. It's really important to understand the decks, all the different decks and their pressure points and how they move and flex. And, I don't have to be necessarily an expert in all those decks, but at the same time, I want to understand like what's Rocco tutoring for in this situation. These are the types of interactions I'm expecting to play against if I'm up against Blue Farm or the different types of Grixis piles that are out there or Tibet, that's doing really well, or especially understanding a deck like Tayam. If you don't know how that deck wins, you should probably educate yourself. So I took it upon myself to not only educate myself, but keeping track of notes and spreadsheets and everything for the group I've been testing with. And unless something changes, it's looking like the group that's going to the cookout. We've got a green-white Sisay list. We've got insert Mardu pile yet to be determined.
Okay.
Whether that is Kalia, Timna Jessica or Tihada. I'm not sure. I know which one I'd like to see them play because I think it, really plays to their strengths. And for just reference, these are people that I grew up with. Like I've known them since they were like 7th and 8th graders. All these guys that are going, they were part of my wedding. They were a part of my groomsmen. One was my best man. So these are like really, really close friends of mine. So I'm pretty brutally honest with them if they try to do something whack. And if John... Do not put Saracenda in your Dihada deck. It does not belong. Don't put it in TNJ either. You can. I mean, I get it in TNJ. It makes a lot of sense. But don't put it in your Dihada deck. It doesn't aid your deck. Don't put that card in there. Stop it. And Tithe Taker is good. Don't cut that card. And then Najila, the Turbo Najila list. What's actually helped me work on the deck that I'm going to be playing is actually working on their decks. Sitting down, talking to them, just brainstorming because, there's a lot of smart Magic players out there, especially in the cEDH space that really put a lot of time and effort and dedication and playing into the list. So there's like good pilots, there's brewers, there's both. And if I don't understand something, I always like to reach out to the people that I know that I don't necessarily need their bias or them to confirm what I'm thinking. If anything, I want them to tell me that I'm wrong and I'm off base and to reevaluate something. So I like to give credit where credit's due and just the respect to all the good players and pilots out there and the brewers out there. So if there's something I need to know, I'll just reach out to them. I'm not prideful. I'm not looking to farm some cloud out there, cloud farm. I regret not naming my deck that a long time ago, but that's okay. Because we talked about that before Kai came out with, well, I think it was his called Cloud Farm,
Yeah, I think so. It's
the
what is it?
Rigo list.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Rigo. Yeah, it's Cloud Farm. Yeah.
because we talked about jokingly calling Korvold Cloud Farm a long time
Yeah.
ago. But yeah, so I've been working with these people and just doing a lot of research across the world and been very fortunate to have the Eminence software, the Top 16 software,
Mm.
because it's allowed me to condense a lot of my searches. I've done a lot of deep dives into articles and other tournaments around the world that still haven't quite gotten on there yet. I can't give my sources, but I've kind of been looking really deep into the Haruyua meta because I feel like they have some just secret technology, even though we have access to all the same cards. And if you don't know anything about like Haruyua, like that's where Japan really came out with like the Dahada decks the last year, I believe. And they were a more, I don't want to say primitive in a negative, but they were more of the, less refined versions of it. But a lot of the similar cards were in there. Obviously, that's where like the Flicker combo came from with that list. So utilizing all the resources around me just to understand maybe there's a card that I haven't been paying attention to or given enough respect to because their meta looks a lot different than ours, but there's some good ideas that come out of there. One thing about the deck list from Japan, I think they use all parts of the buffalo the best. Everything to me looks very functional. It may not necessarily look as streamlined, but it looks like it all works. That's been like my tournament prep, and we've been keeping a spreadsheet of all of our decks that we've been playing and playing against and like different metrics that we're looking at. And honestly, the biggest thing that I've found for myself is just make good mulligan decisions. Don't keep bad hands. Try to convince yourself to keep that hand because statistically, like when you look at your opening 7, your first 7, it's probably not going to be that good.
Yeah.
Not all of us get to open up with just Jeweled Lotus with our 3-mana commanders, but I just want to make good decisions. I want to be very disciplined in my decisions because I think structure equals freedom. And if you're structured with your mulligan decisions, it will allow you to have more bandwidth mentally and flex and pivot points in the game and allows you to be maybe a little bit more wild and explosive when it matters and take greater chances because that's something that's, I think, pretty interesting is a lot of the mental aspects on how to play the game, not just like how the cards function, but how you function as an individual and just understanding like the traps and stuff you set for yourself, or you convince yourself, I just need one more land, or if I top deck this, and just understanding how to overcome your own barriers and your hurdles. And once you identify those things, you work through it. And you have a good friend group or play group that allows you to not allow yourself to keep those trap hands. And we're pretty open with all of our information, but once we sit down and play, we play, by the tournament rules. We timers everything, judge calls, obviously no takesies, backsies, those type of things, unless they're deemed appropriate, like if something's cast and there's nothing been passed or anything like that. Enough about that. It's what everybody wants to talk about, Mono Eye Heliod. No, like I said, I've been working on Korvold, and I was really happy with where my Korvold list was the like 26 land turbo variant of Korvold. I really enjoyed that deck. I thought that deck was like spot on where I really wanted it to be. And then the recent tournaments, something happened. And that's when I came to the realization that we need another way to attack the game that isn't casting Dockside Extortionist. I really want to make sure that Defense Grid resolves. Or, especially like Dosen resolves pretty easily, but specifically Defense Grid, because while Defense Grid is one of the things that is harder to counter, it still can be countered.
Yeah.
I want to be able to look at, is there a way to maximize playing a card like Defense Grid? Because I'm Sans White, so in Sans Blue, so I don't have that type of interaction, and I don't have truly Silence or Grand Abolish. But there are still tools for the deck that allow it to. And I've been running Defense Grid and Dosen in my list at least since last year. And I remember when those cards first came in, I got a lot of pushback on them just from the conventional theory of, but if you pass the turn, you're going to do this. I'm like, look, I'm not passing the turn when I cast these cards. Like that's that's not how the deck functions. The deck's trying to have play patterns like Eldritch Evolution, your Dockside Extortionist away into a Dosen, or Dork into a Dosen, cast a reanimation on Dockside, make X amount of treasures, sack those treasures, draw those cards, and then you just continue to chain. If you draw 5 to 10 cards off of your Korvold and you lose, you weren't winning that game no matter what. So it doesn't matter. And even then, your Korvold can still eat those pieces away if you need to, or you can sack your Dosen to like a die block intent. Oh wait, then if that was the case, I'd probably just win the game because I would just sack something else. That's the deck I've been working on. My list is up on Moxfield. It's also the deck database Korvold list that I have. I'm down to 25 lands. So there's a few things that I like wrote down that I specifically want to talk about the deck. We'll start with like kind of the creatures. I don't think you can cut Mayhem Devil in the current format going forward. I think there's too many creatures that you need to be able to interact with, especially to like Dosen while on a very, very small scale, but basically Grand Abolisher, even forcing a Ranger Captain to sacrifice on not your turn. Being able to ping through Grand Abolisher, I think is really important. Obviously, being able to kill like an Orcish Bowmaster, and we're yet to see the impact of that card, but one simple ping takes care of the Bowmaster, get rid of that card, those type of things, and just a really nice, really interaction. If you have your Korvold and your Mayhem Devil out and you sack something, the Korvold will trigger, but so will the Mayhem Devil, and you can stack it as such to where you can shoot the Bowmaster to where the Bowmaster is not going to see the Korvold draw the card, so you don't get punished. So that's just kind of a little key interaction to understand that. But I just think Mayhem Devil also being a combo card is really important because, again, it's a creature combo. Ruthless Technomancer with either Mayhem Devil or Scrub Prospector with Dockside. That just allows you to, again, to bypass a lot of stuff. I'm still on Corpse Stance because I really do like Corpse Stance because at very worst, it is a 3-mana reanimation piece. It was really interesting. Like my Goblin Engineer died and I just Corpse Stance my Engineered back and it has haste. So I just was able to put a defense grid into play, one from there. The thing that I noticed about Korvold specifically, and I've built every probably variation of Korvold there is, and I've worked really hard on all these like different variations. A list that we talked about to some extent, I called it the 4 bros: Douthie, Grim Hireling, Professional Facebreaker, and Opposition Agent. And while people thought that that wasn't the way to play Korvold, that deck also top 16'd at the event.
It was a CCS grand opening.
CCS, there we go. So that Korvold deck topped, and like there, right there, boom, confirmation bias. That's what I should be playing. I'm always tinkering and tutoring, and there for a while that package was really well when I thought Blue Farm was like the de facto deck, and it helped fight through a lot of those type of cards, the Dranniths, the Douthie Voidwalkers, those type of cards. Those cards are always going to be around, but Korvold's not really a card advantage engine. That's kind of something people always like, yeah, Korvold can grind, and it can, but Korvold's a storm card. It's like this insane storm engine. So I just looked at it, I was like, man, I need to get Bergie back in this list. Bergie, I think, is one of those cards that I don't think we really, and I want to give credit to Drake Sasser on this, Vile Drake. There was an episode of Playing with Power with him and Cal, and they were talking about the top 10 red cards, and he was speaking about Bergie. And I just think he's correct. I don't think we really realize how good Bergie truly is. It's this mana battery that is also red ad nauseum on the backside. And when I was like thinking about adding Peer into the Abyss back into the deck or leave it out, it's like, I don't need Peer into the Abyss. I have Harnfell. Like, that is just Peer into the Abyss. Obviously functionally different cards, but that's another card that I need. And then, I was on a Bolsa Citadel package for a while. I went through like basically this ladder. I go, okay, what do I want to do? I want to play this really cool artifact-centric version of Korvold with the Welders, the Engineers, the Chernobyl style stuff. Played that deck probably close to 30 games and won quite a bit of those games. But then I realized I was like, that's not what Korvold does, because most of those games I never cast Korvold. I didn't need to. And I'm like, okay, if that's the case, then why am I playing this deck as Korvold? I should just be playing Timna Jessica at that point, or some other list that takes advantage of those style of decks. And while I think Bolsa Citadel is just a really powerful card, there's some weird tension in the deck with Magda. When we talked about this, if I have a Korvold out and I sack 5 treasures to Magda to go get, those cards, I don't want to draw that Bolsa Citadel or the Hoarding Broodlord, which either,
happened to me one of the first times I played that deck was crack 5 treasures, 5th card with Citadel. It's like, oh, okay, well, this was before Broodlord was printed. So it's like, oh, well, I guess I'm getting like a grinding station now. Like your next best target is a lot worse.
And we shared that up a little bit, and I'll get into that in a little bit, but that deck still performed. It still did really well. And then we tried a variation without the Demon and the Dragon, and it felt a lot better. Though I think Villas is a really good magic card when you reanimate it. And Hoarding Broodlord's really cool because it takes apart, it maximizes your Saw in half. I don't want to play Burn Offering in my deck. And I've gotten really close to the different variations. I tried a Cloudstone Curio variation. Ultimately, the deck was being pulled into a direction to which was taking away from what the deck's really good. And if you've ever played Treasure Storm Korvold, that deck hits a reanimation piece almost on every dockside crack. So whenever you're going through a dockside from 4 to 6 treasures, you're seeing a piece that's going to put the dockside back into play. And where that deck's evolved over time was with the inclusion of Defense Grid and Dosin. Dosin gets a lot of support in the deck because of Finale Devastation. And really, most importantly, Eldritch Evolution. That card's probably insane in that deck. Actually, probably could consider playing a card like Birthing Pod, because Birthing Pod's again to counter. It's easy to sack a Dork into a Dockside. It's definitely easy to sack a Dockside into a Dosin. So that might be a card that's worth considering later down the line. I haven't had enough time playing with it yet, and I'm not on a super heavy creature count right now. But to round back to where we're talking about Bergie, I think Bergie is exactly where the deck needs to be, because Bergie is going to allow us to maximize what we're trying to do. It's going to give us one of those sides that the deck's trying to do. It's either trying to combo through a nice Storm turn, or it's going to maximize the Harnfeld, which is really good. That's where we get to abuse the Final Fortune effects. And that's something that Korvold does a really great job of. We've seen other decks do it. That's the technology that's become way better. It's been there for a little bit. It got kind of brought to light, probably more so to the mainstream and not through the Discords. Because a lot of this technology was there. There were tons of people doing tons of work on this already. But when like Bryant Cook kind of came along, it became more popularized. And then we've seen it played in the Gila, and we've seen them go off of it. But now we're starting to see like cards like Chance for Glory make their way back in, because these decks are trying to win.
Yeah.
Like they're trying to win within a certain time frame, and your equity, and as the game progresses, it might dwindle, depends on the matchup. But like this deck utilizes these kind of effects very well, because a common play pattern is putting like Dockside, Korvold, do some stuff, draw some cards, slam a Dosin down, cast a Final Fortune effect, untap with all your resources. You're probably going to win from there. And that's something that's really I've enjoyed, is having those effects. Also makes your Necropotence turns a lot better.
Yeah.
Because that carries over for Necropotence, which is really nice. Bergie was kind of the cornerstone of that. And that's something that, like I said, Valdrick was talking about, was just the power level of Bergie and how I don't think it's fully tapped yet. And I don't think we're there yet. And I know it's been like put in different decks, and decks didn't like it because it didn't show the show. On a Storm deck, you want something like Bergie. The low lands with Korvold has been something I've been playing around with. I've played as many as 28 lands and went as low as 24. 25 to 26 seems about right for what the deck's trying to do. Right now I'm on 25, and I just keep tabs of the card that I've been liked. If this is the land, would it matter? And again, when you're trying to close the game out in turns 3 to 4 at the latest, you really want it to be a piece that gives you action. And there's different ways to do it. We've leveraged some mana rocks that way. So 25 lands is kind of where I'm at. If it's 26, that's not a negative. I think somewhere between that, and don't be afraid of your 5 mana commander. You make tons of mana in this deck. That's what the deck does.
If you're not used to Korvold, one thing people kind of are misled on, or might come into kind of doing wrong, is that I see is like a lot of these big mana commander decks, they will try to rush out their commander, like Tivit. If you can go turn 2 Tivit, regardless of your board state, it's good.
Yeah.
Korvold is one of the few where you do not want to necessarily rush out Korvold if you're not ready for him. Again, like we mentioned, Korvold eats up your stuff. Korvold has to come in and eat something. More often than not, if you're doing Korvold as early as you can, you don't have a lot of stuff left over for him to eat, unless you did a very big turn where it's just time to go for the win anyways.
Right. And so I'm not trying to make my land drops every turn. You got to think about it. You only have so many land drops in your deck. I want those land drops to really matter. That's why I'm on cEDH traders. And again, more technology that unfortunately I didn't come up with, but I can give absolute credit to the people who did. cEDH traders has been really good, obviously maximizing the talismans. But I really want to stay within the creatures and talk about Goblin Engineer. Goblin Engineer, through all this experimentation, is the creature that stayed. If you actually look how a lot of the Korvold decks are constructed, there's not another 2-drop in the deck. Typically, outside of Dockside Extortionist. And whenever you want to cast your Eldritch Evolution to go get like a Ruthless Technomancer, you put a lot of pressure on Dockside to do that. Typically, that's what happens anyways. But being able to utilize like an Engineer, put whatever piece you need into play, whether that's a Curse Mirror, which has been, by the way, Curse Mirror has been like top-notch phenomenal in the deck. It took the of like Felwar Stone. It's really good. It does exactly what I want it to. It works really well with obviously Dockside Extortionist. I've copied a Tivit with it. I've copied Temnas and just having to draw 3 cards that turn and then cast like a Final Fortune, untap, use the mana, did some stuff. It was phenomenal. It's such a good silver bullet that again plays into what the deck does. And obviously that kind of came with the Magda package, but then Magda didn't last because I wasn't getting Bolts of Citadel anymore or anything like that. But being able to still tutor out the Curse Mirror, Defense Grid's been obviously obviously the slam dunk for that card because it puts the fear of God into people when they see me like play a Goblin Engineer and put a defense grid in the graveyard because they're like, oh my gosh, they play around that. It's also a good bluff, and it's a Goblin that happens to also sack Discard Prospector. So it's been a really sweet card to round out that nice 2-drop slot that just happens to work really nicely with the deck. Being able to also get Wishclaw Talisman, like that's kind of a thing that I've talked to people about is like, just like the Time Walk effects, whether you're on 2 to 3, you get to utilize them as almost like combos with Goblin Engineer, which is really nice because you can just cast them and then get back your Wishclaw Talisman out of your graveyard and then just pop off tutor for whatever you need for. So it's been like one of those really interesting cards. There was a player a long time ago that they used to play Goblin Engineer and their Rogrek Eker list that was like a Razaketh build that would basically just like Hermit Druid into the Razaketh and all that type of stuff. And then they played like Turn to Earth and whatnot. But they were talking about just how good the Goblin Engineer was. I went back and looked. I had a deck list that I made in like April of last year in 2022. And that was the list that had the Engineer. And I just kind of went away from it. I didn't give it enough time to flesh it out. And now that I have some really good people around me, I've been able to accelerate my results a lot faster because like different ideas are bouncing off the walls. And also I'm seeing other people be very successful with it. And that's been really helpful in that regard. And the identity of Korvold has stayed within itself. It's utilized the cards that make it really, really good. Anytime I've cut like a reanimation piece, I felt like the deck like lost its identity and a part of its power. And then it just kind of became this other deck. If I wanted to play those other decks, I would just play them. But if I'm going to play Korvold for being this powerful storm engine that can just slam the door, shut on somebody. Because everybody knows if you let any storm variant deck just go unchecked, it's going to win the game. It's utilizing a lot of the philosophies of Mardu of just slam a silence effect piece like a Dosin, a defense grid, and then just go from there. It's worked out really well. I'm really, really happy with the list. I'd say there's probably like 1 to 2 flex slots that you could probably mess around with. I've messed around with less dorks. I think it's important to have a certain number of density of dorks, no matter how bad they are, because you need things to sacrifice to your powerful effects of Culling the Weak, Diabolic Intent, cards like that. But I really believe in the power of Bergie, the Time Walk effects, of the Final Fortune effects. 2 seems about the right number for this deck because Korvold does allow you to draw through those. So you don't necessarily need 3. I would not begrudge anybody for playing all 3. I think it's really nice. Just be understanding of what you're giving up for that. And then Orcish Lumberjack, that slot has always pretty much been like Elves of Deep Shadow in a traditional build. Orcish Lumberjack, I can't tell you actually how good that card probably is. And that card doesn't see like the light of like a ton of cEDH play because the decks that play it, when you look at something maybe like when like Rocco like used to play at Rocco, for some reason Rocco always tends to go a little bit longer. I don't know why, even though the deck can like combo off out of nowhere, they always want to put like Collector Roof into play and just make you hate the game. But joking aside, or Draneth, rather, Orcish Lumberjack says tap, cast Dosin, tap, cast Eldritch Evolution, tap, cast Bergie, tap, cast a Wheel. Or if you're on Jessica's Will, it's tap, cast. It really takes up a lot of that 3 mana bulk. Plus, you have a mana left over from your land. That's pretty powerful. Like being able to be self-sufficient with Eldritch Evolution, I think is wild. Tap your Bayou for black, sack your forest for 3 green, cast Eldritch Evolution, sack your Orcish Lumberjack. Now you have a black floating, and you go get your Dockside Extortionist. That's awesome. And I know Korvold's going to be a big target with Orcish Bowmaster out there, so that's why we added more removal to the deck. We were already on Lightning Bolt, Abrupt Decay, Assassin's Trophy, obviously Mayhem Devil Stays, and we're also on Culling Ritual because that card's really powerful. But I think having something like Fatal Push, or because you can't, I don't think you can play Slaughter Pact unless you're a Hulk deck. You can play Slaughter Pact in a Hulk deck, or in a deck that is using the Slaughter Pact to combo off with their own creatures, like Anala you can Slaughter Pact your own like cards so you can reanimate them back, do the thing. And that's also kind of a part for Dockside, but I have to be able to kill cards like Douthie, Opposition Agent, Orcish Bowmaster, those kind of cards. So I think Fatal Push is like right there. I think it's just that sweet card. It's going to hit all your problematic little guys earlier. Somebody's always going to crack a fetch or do something. So it's going to be able to hit your opposition agents, or you're going to do it yourself. Having that Fatal Push is really nice because it's just going to also going to kill a Winota, which is really, really nice. Nothing feels better when they Jewel Lotus their Winota and I just Fatal Push it. And I'm just like, oh.
Yeah, being able to do that specifically is really awesome. That's also one of the card, because like Cut Down hits a lot of these things, but it doesn't hit like your Croms. It doesn't hit a Winota. it does hit a little most of these kind of stacksy things, but yeah, push, especially when you're running like this is such a fetch land heavy format and treasure heavy format.
Yeah, I wouldn't be upset with cut down either. It's just really what you want to play in that slot. I think being able to kill Tyam is really important too. Being able to smoke Tyam is really nice. And really outside of that, a lot of the core list has stayed the same. It's just been a few innovations. And what's funny is we started with a blank canvas. We built this massive deck and just kind of said, here, I have 200 playable cards, and you start chopping it back down. And this isn't a list that I've had established for a while. And even then, you got to recognize that this deck can be better or be better for the meta and just be able to shift. But again, just the simple additions of like the engineer, going back up to double time walk effects, has been really, really nice. Cutting some lands down. It just kind of stinks because you don't have a perfect mana base. I hate running cards like Forbidden Orchard or Gemstone Mine or any of those. I will not put Exotic Orchard in my 25 land deck. I refuse to do it. I think that card is a trap because green is also not ultra common in pods anymore.
Yeah.
Well, you're going to probably have green. I don't want to take that chance. And I think that's where the kind of the variation of this list and some of the other like Rakdos Turbo X decks is like you've seen like Dihada start playing Rakdos Signet. And that's a really good card for that list because it converts that colorless mana into red-black to really cast your commander. Because your commander, while being a Dual Lotus commander, Dual Lotus isn't perfect in that deck, except for it's actually better the second time you play it. But I think that's really interesting just because like typically if you look at most cEDH decks, they don't play the signets. But if a deck, especially like decks that play Ancient Tomb of City of Traders, you have your big powerful colorless artifacts. I'm also on Grim Monolith. That's a card that's worth considering. I didn't have room for it. I didn't know where to put. I just wanted that extra dork, I think. Because I think ultimately this deck, while it has like 17, 18 artifacts, I think that's right where you want to be. You need to be able to still produce double green. Like the deck does have double red, double green, double black. So question is, how do I win the game? Really simple. I win with Mayhem Devil or I win with a Breach Loop. Just like most other Breach decks, it has Dualcaster Twin Flame. It can win with Dualcaster Twin Flame. It can win with Dockside, Eternal Witness Twin Flame loops. It can win with Saw and Half loops. Once it does the thing, it does the thing, and you can win no matter how you want to. And again, just utilizing your cards, Lightning Bolt being a really solid removal spell, killing the things that cause you problems, but also you can just kind of get people with the Saw and Half, with the Dualcaster combo, with the Lightning Bolt. And you can also do it at instant speed, which is why I really like Necromancy and Corpse Dance. So if your Dualcaster's dead, it can still do that. That's that deck in the nutshell. I don't think I missed anything. Oh, Veil Summer, probably pretty good in this format against Bowmaster, just saying.
It's going to be interesting to see how some of these new things, because it is cool. We're in a pretty unique time where there is a lot of sort of developments on decks. We're seeing like some new things pop up. Like you're talking about Mardu's doing very well. Like not that long ago, I was making a video about how turbo decks don't win tournaments. And then we've seen like 3 Mardu decks this year win a tournament, I think. Larger tournaments, like people are showing up to these larger events with, and especially like Sans blue decks. Again, Tyam, not a turbo list, but also not a blue deck. So we're seeing a lot of shakeups. And then also we're getting not a lot of very impactful cards, but like just super impactful cards, and just a couple of them from the Lord of the Rings set, where it's like people are talking about Bowmasters being in every black deck, which I don't think that'll be the case, but especially like every multicolor black pile of cards is probably likely to run it if you're doing Timna stuff like we talked about. Any of those decks are likely looking at it. And again, it's something that a lot of people are going to want to test. Same thing with Lotho. We even started, and it's Lotho Corrupt. It's spelled like, it's Sheriff, but it's like spelled like a Hobbit thing. So it's like Shriff is what it looks like. And we were already saying like, don't feed the Shriff. And it was just like being echoed throughout the rest of the game, which is like, please don't feed the Shriff. Don't feed, like just immediately caught on, because it is just like, it has that kind of problematic-ish play pattern of just like, man, if we just let this thing do it, we're gonna get so screwed. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to see some of these things. And again, a card we saw a lot of stocks rise up in is Notion Thief, which gets absolutely destroyed by Bowmaster. So that's gonna be an interesting how that kind of shakes out. Yeah, it's been cool to talk about this. Got an hour and a half, so we don't want to go too much into it. I'd love to talk more about like setting up a play group and kind of our experience. So our experience has been kind of similar to what Eric described with my group. We're really trying to, or we have like a timer. We're looking to kind of make tight plays. I think a thing I struggle with that I think you should be mindful of when playtesting is the goal isn't winning. Winning is a side effect of the goal. If you're getting better, you're going to win, but the goal, especially in playtesting, I don't think should be to win. The goal should be to improve and see yourself get better, because you're not trying to win these playtest games. You don't want to fixate on that, especially getting emotionally invested in games, which I get. You sit there sometimes like 2 hours, you're going to get invested, but your goal is to take what you experience here and what you're learning into a big event. Take all of that, be able to digest it when you get, wrecked by, oh, they just happen to have this. I didn't even think about it. And I think it's especially helpful to do sort of like rewinds of like, well, how could we have, as a table, have stopped this win attempt if we had communicated better? We had like a super convoluted line and we had to think of was like, oh, I know, no, what you should have done. We knew Nissa was representing green. You should have told us about the abrade first, let them tap the mana, let the mana fizzle, then we can Assassin's Trophy the Ashaya in the second main. And just like, it's maybe something not reasonable to expect, but like that's something I came up with within a few minutes of us losing. Taking that into the next game and just knowing like I could have communicated better. You were too worried about my Citadel, which doesn't win necessarily, but that Ashaya sure freaking wins every freaking game it's ever on the board. Just taking that sort of approach, and just, even though these are serious games, more serious than normal, if you're just casually playing, be a bit loose about it. I think having a looseness too. You don't want to get too tight and tense. And again, winning is the side effect. I would definitely keep that in your mind. You want to be able to win more games later. You don't have to win every single game in your playtesting. You still want to have fun, be very supportive, talk to your group, let them know what they did wrong, ask them what you did wrong or what they could have done better, and give feedback on cards and how they performed. And I think you're going to do well.
Yeah. I definitely agree with a lot of that. So
this has been Lemora's Cards, learning cEDH. If you enjoyed this, make sure to like, comment, subscribe. Let us know down below what you liked about it. If you enjoyed sort of this more, I guess, casual type of episode, and you want to hear more about stuff we're playing or what we think about upcoming cards or set releases or events, just let us know down below. Check out the merch. I think it's the best cEDH merch out there. Check it out. Link to the affiliates, Card Trader and Ink Gaming, down below. And again, this has been Learning cEDH. Thank you so much for listening. Have a good one.
Peace.